What's up, guys? It's me, Tiff, and I'm in New York City watching Sam Bankman-Fried's criminal trial in person, and I think today might have been the most damning day for Sam Bankman-Fried so far. Today, we got to see the prosecution and defense's closing arguments. Over the past few weeks, we've heard the government's argument, but it's been sort of a fragmented story. We heard testimonies from Caroline Ellison, Gary Wang, Nishad Singh, Adam Yedidia, Can's son, but they each obviously had their own perspective, and they all sort of felt like one piece of the puzzle. And today is the day that the government put all of those pieces together into one very succinct, effective, and damning portrait of Sam Bankman-Fried. It was honestly masterful, and their case feels pretty airtight to me. The prosecutor who presented the closing argument was Nicholas Ruse, and he's very tall and articulate and has a very strong and commanding presence. And in contrast, Sam Bankman-Fried's lawyer comes off as very soft-spoken and even meek. Obviously, this is just my perception being in the courtroom, but maybe others read him differently. Before we dive into the content of the closing arguments, I will point out that Sam's parents, Barbara and Joe, were in the courtroom at the beginning of the day and notably left the courtroom for the prosecution's closing argument and returned for the defense's closing argument. I don't actually want to shit on them right now because I'm sure they're going through a very hard time, but it is just something that I had in my notes. So first, we watched the prosecution's closing argument. He kicked off by pointing out that thousands of people from all over the world put millions of dollars into FTX, which turned into billions of dollars, and then thousands of people tried to withdraw their funds but were not able to. Where did the money go? Whose responsibility was this? And then he very theatrically pointed at Sam Bankman-Fried and says, "This man, Samuel Bankman-Fried, he spent his customers' money and lied about it. It went to investments, to repay loans, to pay expenses, to buy properties, and to make political donations." He says, "It was a pyramid of deception, a foundation of lies and false promises, and eventually it collapsed, leaving countless victims in its wake." He points out that customer deposits were theirs and for them alone to use. And employees like Caroline Ellison, Gary Wang, Nishad Singh, and Adam Yedidia all testified that they too thought customer deposits belonged to customers. This is not about crypto or financial jargon. This is about stealing and greed. And the core dispute here is, did the defendant know that taking the money was wrong? Nicholas Ruse asserts he took the money and knew it was wrong. He thought he was smarter and better and could talk and walk his way out of this. And that ends today with you. Points to the jury. You see, the defendant schemed and lied to get the money, and now it's gone. He told customers over and over that the money was there. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He didn't have to testify. The defendant took the stand and told his story, and he lied to you. He testified about things that don't really matter, like the fact that Alameda started in an Airbnb and why he picked the Miami Heat stadium. But he was a different person on cross. He couldn't remember a single detail about his company. Apparently, he was evasive over 140 times on cross-examination. He asked, re-asked, looked away, and lied about big things and little things. He conveniently put together a story that excluded him from the fraud, and over 3 days he took the stand and lied. To believe his story, you'd have to ignore all of the evidence, all of the testimony from Caroline Ellison, Nishad Singh, Gary Wang, etc., the documents, financial records, and the defendant's own statements and lies. You'd have to believe the defendant, who graduated from MIT and testified before Congress, was actually clueless and had no idea what was happening at his own company. Quick pause, but this coverage is made possible by support from Evertas. Evertas is the first company in the world to provide insurance solutions for crypto and mining infrastructure. And Evertas is a Lloyd's of London cover holder, which means their policies are A+ rated. Ask your broker how Evertas can help you manage your risk and protect your enterprise, or visit evertas.com. Now back to the video. You heard from co-conspirators and saw documents. All of this shows the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Nicholas Ruse goes on to argue that the defendant is Alameda. He was the 90% owner and publicly was the CEO until 2021, as well as the chairman and sole member of Alameda's board. Alameda's profits were his profits. And then Nicholas Ruse goes on to make quite a bold claim, stating that Alameda had no investors. Instead, they borrowed money with loans and were always looking for more sources of capital. So the defendant started FTX and found a new source of capital, customer money. According to to her testimony, Sam Bankman-Fried told Caroline Ellison that FTX would be a good source of capital, and he set up the system that allowed Alameda to borrow from FTX. The $65 billion line of credit and the allow negative code in the codebase that allowed Alameda to have a negative balance on FTX without ever being liquidated. Moreover, if you've been following this, you'll know that Sam Bankman-Fried's main excuse is that Alameda was just another customer of FTX and they were participating in FTX's margin program, which is how they were borrowing FTX customer funds and why he thought it was permissible. But Nicholas Rose points out that Alameda's main account, info@, did not even have spot margin enabled, so they were not borrowing through spot margin. So Nicholas Rose proceeded to call Sam Bankman-Fried out on multiple lies and inconsistencies, but I want to jump to an interesting portion of the prosecution's closing argument in which Nicholas Rose very cleanly lays out 6 key moments in which Sam Bankman-Fried could have chosen to either come clean or to double down on the fraud. Spoiler alert, he does double down on the fraud. Nicholas Rose says that Sam Bankman-Fried knew he'd be spending customer money and each time took the criminal path. So the first key moment was in 2021 when Sam Bankman-Fried decided to buy back stock from Binance. At the time, Caroline Ellison and Sam discussed this, and Caroline pointed out that we don't have the money for this. We'll have to borrow from FTX to do it. And Sam said, "That's okay, this is really important, so we'll have to get it done." So they proceeded to use $1 billion that they had and $1.2 billion from customer funds for the Binance buyout. Nicholas Rose points out that this was way back in 2021, long before there was market turmoil that caused problems. So when he bought back the Binance shares, they didn't really have these issues and basically didn't have that as an excuse to blame. Rose then pulled up a screenshot of an email in which Sam Bankman-Fried says to transfer the money to buy back the Binance shares and points out that no one else from Alameda is on this email, so it was him and him alone leading the Binance buyout. Nicholas Rose then softly attacks some of Sam Bankman-Fried's previous excuses and says this was not the result of hedging gone wrong or bad luck. This was Sam spending money he wanted to spend but didn't have because he said it's really important. Rose says that Sam had a choice and decided to double down. Key moment number 2, spending billions of dollars on new investments in the fall of 2021. In 2021, Sam wanted to make $3 billion in additional venture investments and asked Caroline Ellison to do some calculations to see whether or not they'd be able to repay their third-party loans if there were a large market downturn and if Sam were to go forward with the $3 billion of venture investments. Caroline Ellison's calculation excluded what we've called Sam coins, or FTT, Solana, Serum, etc., and basically showed that they had $8 billion in assets and $9 billion in loans. Caroline also included a line called FTX Borrows, which was basically a code name for FTX customer funds that they could take and potentially spend. Nicholas Rose then says, "You don't have to go to MIT to know that if you have more debt than you have money, and you have access to FTX customer funds, then where is the money coming from? Customers." Caroline's calculations essentially told her that investing $3 billion into illiquid investments was a very bad idea since they already could not afford to repay their loans. But what did Sam do? Sam wanted to go ahead with the investments anyways, knowing that the money was coming from customers. So again, Nicholas Rose repeats that Sam had a choice to come clean or double down, and Sam decided to double down. Key moment number 3, the defendant sees a $10 billion hole in June 2022. Nicholas Rose asserts that by June 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried had had discussions with his co-conspirators showing that Alameda had a negative $10 billion balance but told Caroline Ellison to repay loans to third-party lenders anyway. On June 13th, after markets had crashed, apparently Genesis wanted about $400 million of their loans recalled. Nicholas Rose points out that this is literally the scenario that Caroline Ellison and Sam Bankman-Fried talked about prior. So Sam knew that something like this could happen, and it happened. Rose points out that Sam had 2 options. They could have just closed down shop like BlockFi when the markets took a turn, or they could double down, lie, and spend customer funds. This also brought us back to discussing that infamous 8-tab balance sheet. When Genesis wanted to recall their loans, they asked to see a balance sheet. Caroline apparently made an honest balance sheet, sent it to Sam via Signal, but pointed out that it didn't look so good because it showed how many billions of dollars of FTX customer funds they were borrowing. So she testified that Sam agreed it didn't look good, and apparently he told her to think of alternative ways to present the information. So Caroline made a spreadsheet with 8 different tabs with 8 8 different somewhat misleading ways to present the information to disguise the borrowing of customer funds. She testified that Sam looked at these balance sheets, selected Alt 7, and told her to send it off to lenders. Sam, in his testimony, claimed that he didn't even notice that there were 8 different tabs and that he just thought it was one spreadsheet and gave it his okay. He's trying to claim that he didn't instruct Caroline to make misleading balance sheets. And Nicholas Rose shredded this claim apart, saying, "In what world is someone making 8 balance sheets for themselves?" He then pulled up Google metadata, which shows that Sam Bankman-Fried viewed the document on June 19th, hours before it was sent to lenders. Nicholas Rose then said, "2 balance sheets is one too many balance sheets. But 7 alternatives and deciding which one is best? That is definitely fraud." Rose says that from looking at the balance sheets, Sam had to know that they had fewer assets than liabilities and were using customer funds, and he knew it was wrong because why else would he want to remove it from the balance sheets? Key moment number 5. In September of 2022, there was a $14 billion hole and new spending. According to Google metadata of a spreadsheet that Sam Bankman-Fried viewed, by September 1st, Sam Bankman-Fried knew that Alameda was borrowing $13.7 billion of FTX customer funds, according to Google metadata of a spreadsheet that he viewed. Later in September, he wrote a document about wanting to shut down Alameda, but acknowledged that it would be really hard to unwind Alameda. And Nicholas Rose asserts he means the $14 billion of debt from FTX customers, which is literally what he and others discussed. But even with the knowledge of how much Alameda was borrowing from FTX, Sam decided to double down once again and spend hundreds of millions of dollars investing in Anthony Scaramucci's Skybridge Capital and Modulo. And finally, number 6, the defendant's false tweets and confession in November 2022. In November, after CoinDesk leaked a copy of Alameda's balance sheet and customers began to withdraw at increasing rates, Sam Bankman-Fried wrote a Google Doc on November 6th stating that they had enough to process about 1/3 of remaining client assets. In other words, Sam was aware that FTX was missing 2/3 of client funds. But Nicholas Rose says the defendant had a plan, a criminal plan, fraudulent, and this alone is basis to convict him. His plan was to send a confident Twitter thread. The point here, folks, was to get people to stop withdrawing their money. So the following day, after he's acknowledged in Google Docs that they only have 1/3 of client funds, Sam tweets, "FTX has enough to cover all client holdings. We have been processing all withdrawals and will continue to be." He also tweeted, "FTX is fine, all assets are fine," which was obviously not the case. Nicholas Rose referred to this as a series of false tweets to lull his victims into leaving their money to convince them that everything was fine, while the wall was coming crashing down. Nicholas Rose claims that the fact that Sam lied on Twitter is important for 2 reasons. The first being that he had criminal intent, he knew the situation and he lied. Rose says that the second reason, and he expects Judge Kaplan will tell us, that if after obtaining money like customer deposits, the defendant participated in a scheme to keep the victim's money by making false or fraudulent representations, that is, to retain it, that can be a scheme to defraud. So when you find the defendant made these false tweets, that alone is a reason to find him guilty of fraud. Lastly, Nicholas Rose points to what he considers to be an admission. On November 8th, Nishad Singh, who was suicidal at the time, messaged Sam Bankman-Fried via Signal saying, "Wildly selfish of me, but they, the FTX employees, may need to know there wasn't a ton of people orchestrating it. I think it makes them more likely to want to be there to help save the situation." Nicholas Rose says, "What's the it? The it is the fraud." Nishad is saying to the defendant, FTX employees need to know there weren't a ton of people orchestrating this fraud. Nishad wanted Sam to clarify that he, Nishad, was not orchestrating it. Nishad was saying to Sam that he should clarify that he was the one orchestrating it. And how does Sam respond? Yup. For what it's worth, I don't think that's super selfish. I think that's probably correct. Nicholas Rose says, "There it is. Nishad asked the defendant to clarify that he was orchestrating the fraud, and the defendant says, I think that's probably correct. This is an admission to his co-conspirator at the end of the conspiracy that the defendant was orchestrating. That is a reason right there to convict him." Notice what Sam doesn't say. He doesn't say orchestrating what? He doesn't say, "That's not right." He doesn't say anyone else is to blame. He says, "I think that's probably correct." Nicholas Rose closed by saying, "I told you the questions we were going to answer. What happened? Where did the money go? Who is responsible? We've now answered those questions together. What happened? The defendant was motivated by greed and ambition, and he wanted more money for Alameda, so he set up systems to take the money." And this is basically where the fun portion ended, and after that, Nicholas Rose went into the 7 counts that Sam is charged with. So that essentially summarizes the prosecution's closing argument, and I thought it was very strong and it felt airtight to me. Nicholas Rose essentially called out a lot of Sam's lies and potential excuses and made it very difficult for the defense to follow up. It is about 10 p.m., so I need to get showered and get ready to wake up tomorrow because it might be the final day that I attend court. I do feel kind of bad because I pretty much just summarized the prosecution's closing argument. I really try to be somewhat fair and balanced in these, but I also really want to make it into the main courtroom tomorrow. So maybe I can make another video tomorrow on the defense's closing argument, but I don't know if that would be worthwhile since it looks like we're reaching the end of this case. I will say briefly that Sam's lawyer's closing argument felt drastically weaker than the prosecution's, and that seemed to be the general consensus amongst the press corps. The defense's closing argument essentially hinges on the notion that Sam always acted in good faith at the time, and that good faith is a defense to all of the counts that Sam is charged with, and if you believe that he acted in good faith at the time, you must find him not guilty on all counts. In my opinion, it didn't feel that the defense had a clear, comprehensive narrative to show that Sam Bankman-Fried was always acting in good faith. Mark Cohen seemed to sort of zero in on very specific rebuttals to specific arguments rather than having one broad explanation for how all of this happened. But ultimately, apparently it's the government who has the burden of proof, and all jurors must unanimously find Sam guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So maybe one juror thinks there's reasonable doubt that Sam did not intend to commit these crimes, but I will say that just my personal feeling is that the odds are not in his favor, especially after today, because the prosecution's closing arguments were seriously masterful. I will be posting more updates here on YouTube, on Twitter, on Substack, etc. So if you'd like to follow along, feel free to. If not, it's fine. Also, again, thank you to Evertas for making this coverage possible. To learn more about how Evertas's insurance products and services can help crypto companies protect their enterprises and manage their risk, ask your broker or visit evertas.com. Anyway, I love you all so very much, and I'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye!